Hey everybody, Dion here. Wanted to talk today about the philosophy of Benedict Spinoza, specifically about the role the Conatus plays in his philosophy, and what that has to do and how it figures into my philosophy of surfing. So, I first became acquainted with Spinoza's philosophy in graduate school in the classes of Chiara Battici. And the first time I'd read about Spinoza, in fact, was when I was reading Nietzsche's The Gay Science. He says that, oof, this is the first time I found another philosopher that jives with me. I'm not going to get into the deep and specific relationship between Nietzsche and Spinoza, but there is a relationship between Nietzsche's concept of will to power and Spinoza's notion of the Conatus. So this is one way in which Nietzsche was seeing his connection to Spinoza. He was also seeing this, Nietzsche had this concept of the eternal return, and Spinoza has a very interesting concept of eternity, which is wrapped into his notion of God or nature, Deus sive natura, which is, he also calls the eternal infinite substance, that which nothing greater can be thought, from which all things derive. This is really important because we can think of this eternal infinite substance, well, we can't really know of it except through its emanations in modes or attributes. And that's through finite things. So there's a way in which all we really can know of God for Spinoza is through science, is through our study of the natural world, of obtaining certain laws of physics and mathematics and ethics that Spinoza believes we can demonstrate in clear, even geometrical order, and which he does in his famous work, The Ethics. This is my very tattered copy of it. It's also called The Ethics Written in or Demonstrated in Geometrical Order. There's 5 books. The first is on God. The second is on the mind. The third is on the affects. The fourth is on human bondage. And the fifth is on human freedom. So the whole workup is getting to see how we can create the conditions for human beings to be more free. So, spoiler alert, we're not totally free. We're most free, or feel most free, when we're working hard at doing hard things and overcoming ourselves. So again, there's that connection with Nietzsche and self-overcoming. Spinoza's famous quote at the end of the Ethics is, only that which is difficult is worth doing, right? So there we see the connection between Spinoza and the Conatus and surfing right away. Only that which is difficult is worth doing at all. So it's hard to constantly try to understand how the universe works, what we are, how we're connected to one another, what the relationship between our body and our mind are, which is the language is dualistic. But for Spinoza, he has another famous quote, which is, we don't even know what a body can do, and also the mind is nothing but the idea of the body. All of these things are like these intense little packages, or like Russian dolls that we could pack and unpack and talk about endlessly. But the main point I wanted to get across just for this little talk is that once a thing exists in the world as an emanation of the eternal infinite substance, God or nature, it then has knowable properties. And one of those knowable properties is that it has something about it that endeavors to persevere in its own existence, that just wants to keep being the kind of thing that it is. And want is a weird word there. But we do see, when we look, as Nietzsche says, we see this something that could be called something like a will to power, this need to increase one's potential for acting, and one's potential for acting better and more effectively. So what I want to do right now is just give like a brief synopsis of the highlights of each book, and then maybe we can do more in-depth videos about really what's important to take away from all of the books. So the first one of God, he begins with God. Why does he begin with God? He begins with God because God for Spinoza, as for St. Anselm of Canterbury, is that which nothing greater can be thought. Right? So he's looking at that big, he's answering and asking at the same time the greatest of all philosophical questions. Where does everything come from? Can something come from nothing, or must something come from something? And he answers, something must come from something. That something is the eternal infinite substance, God. And he has to describe the nature of God because so many people in his society of then and continually now today say they know what God is, and they make all of these rules about what God wants for us and doesn't want for us, etc., etc. So first of all, for Spinoza, God is not a human. It's nothing like a human. It can't be like a human. Based upon his definitions that he lays forth in the beginning of Book 1, God is infinite. All the finite things in the world that actually have duration can't be God. They can be created by God. They could have some emanation, some part of God, but they can't be God, nor can God be wholly one of those. So God doesn't actually, whatever it is, and he later in Book 3 will call it God or nature, doesn't really care particularly about us. It does do very specific things, or the world operates and nature operates in very specific ways that we can find out through science, which is why Spinoza is beloved by scientists, notably Albert Einstein, many other physicists, because he's just saying that if we keep asking what's behind the Big Bang, what's behind that, what's behind that, we get in the problem of infinite regress. And he's like, we can posit an infinite eternal substance. Can't ever really fully imagine or know what that thing is, but it's just a big old something from which everything else derives. But it's a big old something that must have two major qualities. It must be infinite and it must be eternal. So it can beget space and time, space-time, quantum gravity, particles, people, evolution, processes, etc., but it itself, we actually can't even know it, other than that it's just, to use Anselm again, greater that which nothing greater can be thought. Okay, so that's like the nutshell, and why he starts with that like most basic metaphysical principle in Book 1. So that's what we're going with. That's the groundwork of like why there is anything at all. And that will have really important repercussions for his thoughts about superstition and his thoughts about morality, and also how the unfolding of the rest of the work goes, because we're going to come around to the end to what he calls the intellectual love of God. And the intellectual love of God, to skip the whole entire book and give it away, is nothing other than finding out in ever more fine-tuned ways the way that the whole of nature operates. And we do that through scientific processes. Book 2 is on the mind, and therefore the body. So the nature and origin of the mind. This one is really important for me as an athlete scholar person, because it seems inherent when you do sports that the mind and the body aren't separate from one another. And when I'm teaching surfing and people are like, oh, I just have to think this, or I have to like get some analytical principle or learn some bodily technique, it doesn't work to just learn bodily techniques, especially with surfing, where you have to read the ocean and understand and be able to predict the shifting waves, and then do the techniques to paddle yourself into them, keeping your eyes down the line, forecasting the future a little bit, also putting in your desire of how you want to put your body, and like different things that you want to try on the wave depending on where you're at in your surfing. And any time that you try to weight mental processes over physical processes, or weight physical processes over mental processes, it doesn't work. The mind and the body are constantly working together. And understanding how they work together is part of the scientific endeavor that any human being does to understand how one's body-mind complex operates in this world subjected to physical laws. Also, it gets into how we learn things and how we process information, and we take things from the sense perceptory realm, from the aesthetic realm, from the way we see things, feel things, hear things, smell things, and the way that we process that information, put that information together in order to establish rules for living, or to understand which way to go in a certain way, how those things get imported into our memories, how we hold them there in our memories, and then call upon them to operate ourselves in certain ways. So there's really interesting stuff in book 2 about the relationship between the mind and the body, and what the role endeavoring to persevere in existence, which is the Conatus, plays in that relationship. Book 3 is on the affects. So once we've established, or once Spinoza has established, the nature of God or nature, the nature of the relationship between body and mind, he's like, look, we are beings that in this world are connected to world and others, and we affect others and are affected by others, and we react to others and others react to us. And part of the process of the intellectual love of God is understanding that when we act in certain ways, it will affect others in XYZ way, or when others act in XYZ way to us, or to things that we love, or to things that we hate, we're going to react in certain ways. So the more that we know that we're affected and we affect in these certain ways, the more that we are practicing what he calls the intellectual love of God, which is understanding how things connect and are connected to one another. And the reason why we care about the way that things are connected to one another is because when we apprehend more clearly how things are connected, again, learning a sport, especially a difficult sport like surfing, makes this clear. We do the thing better. In Spinoza's language, our potential for acting is increased. So we're constantly after increasing our potential for acting because it brings joy and flourishing into our lives. And when there's more joy and flourishing in our lives, so when we affect the world with more joy and flourishing, we see more joy and flourishing in the world. And it's never perfect, and there's so many things that thwart this process, but that's basically the point of learning the affects, learning what it means to learn, learning what it means that we are the kind of being that strives to persevere in our existence and increase our powers of acting, and then figuring out the best ways to go about doing that. Book 4 on human bondage talks more about the affects and about the ways that gum up the process. To put it in a way that he puts it in the theological political treatise, well, there Spinoza asks, why do people desire their slavery as if it were their freedom? Why are people superstitious? Why do people think that taking more for themselves is actually increasing their flourishing by taking stuff away from other people? So in the surfing contest, I always think of waves as the resource, right? And this is what's behind my Spinozistic formulation of the little motto, more waves, more joy. Because if you're correctly apprehending our relationship to others, we are not slaves to the other. We are bonded to one another, but we don't need to put ourselves in these positions of servitude and dominance if we share. So it turns out that what is most to everyone's advantage is that we all see more clearly that everybody's potential for acting is increased, right? That everybody's Conatus is spinning freely and helping the other Conatuses spin in certain ways, so that when you catch a good wave and I see you catching a good wave, that brings my level up. That brings me more joy. I'm seeing new ways to ride a wave, or I'm seeing that you just found a new way to ride a wave, and maybe I facilitated that, and that feels really good to me. So obviously Spinoza doesn't himself write about surfing in book 4, but he writes about the ways that people feel that that they, for lack of better words, they act out of insecurity of resources, or act out of entitlement. And when you act out of insecurity and act out of entitlement, you're actually acting out of a position of servitude or bondage. You're not acting out of intellectual love of God or human freedom. So the last book is basically on this, the hard work of continuing to strive to know more about who we are, about how we're connected to one another, and about what our connection to the entire universe is. And it's not easy. It's never easy. I haven't explained it all of it in its intricate detail in this tiny little YouTube video. But to sum up, the Conatus is that force or process of desiring to persevere and endeavoring to see more clearly so that we increase our powers for acting, which feels really good. So it's like in the surfing context, going from face planting all of the time and not knowing, is that a good wave? Is it my turn? To, that's a good wave, but it's not my turn. It's her turn. I'm going to let her go. Would you like to go? She says yes. She goes on the wave. She gets a nice ride. Oh, look, the next one is coming right to me, and I know that it's coming right to me. I feel confident in myself, my surfboard. I turn. I look down the line. I know how many paddles. I can sense how much time it takes for me to get into this wave. I stand up and I perform my dance on the wave. Maybe she's paddling back out and she's happy because she just rode a wave. Then she gets to see me riding a wave and we're both happy. Nobody collides with one another. We paddle back out. Maybe another one of our friends is coming down. Maybe we're in a situation where we know our equipment well enough and there aren't any waves on that day. And we're surfing with our friend and we both want the same wave and we communicate to one another. Do you want to go? Hey, let's go together. Great. We're both in control of our equipment enough. We take the same wave together. We give each other a high five and we're having a great time surfing. That translates into us going home and being happy with our spouse, happy with our children, happy with our pets. Our bodies feel healthy. Our bodies feel happy. We maintain our youth for longer and we're participating in what Spinoza will call. So doing that looks like what Spinoza calls intellectual love of God. And it feels like freedom. And it turns out it's the most humanly way we can be free, is increasing our powers for acting. So that's it in a nutshell for this little video. And hope to see people in book club so we can get really into the nuts and bolts of the ethics and how the Conatus works and what it is. And look forward to making more of these videos and seeing you guys in the water.